On February 3, 1944, Private Tommy Chen was trying to dispose of 50 gallons of rancid cooking oil on Bougainville Island. The oil had been sitting in the tropical heat for 3 weeks and smelled like death itself. His mess sergeant told him to burn it and make it disappear. So Tommy mixed it with gasoline to make it catch fire faster. Then, because he thought it might help it burn cleaner, he added soap flakes. Tommy Chen had just accidentally created primitive napalm. 12 hours later, he would use it to stop a Japanese banzai charge of 200 soldiers. The Marine Corps would ban him from cooking for 3 weeks, and weapons engineers would study his mistake for the next 6 months. By early 1944, American Marines on Bougainville had been dug in for 3 months. The Japanese, pushed into the jungle, were starving and desperate. Intelligence warned a major counterattack was coming. The battalion commander worried about one sector in particular, a 700-yard stretch where jungle came right up to the wire. Only 2 machine gun positions covered the entire area. If the Japanese hit there in force, it would be catastrophic. Tommy Chen's field kitchen sat exactly 200 yards behind that weak point. Tommy was 19, from San Francisco's Chinatown. He'd lied about knowing how to cook to avoid frontline infantry duty. The recruiter asked if he had skills. Tommy said, "I can cook," without hesitation. This was completely untrue. He'd never cooked a meal in his life. 6 months later, he was on Bougainville, responsible for feeding 400 Marines, discovering that cooking for 400 people was significantly harder than he'd imagined. On the morning of February 3rd, staring at 50 gallons of rancid oil, Tommy just wanted the smell gone. He had no idea he was about to accidentally invent a weapon. The Japanese strategy was born of desperation. 12,000 troops remained on the island, cut off from resupply for months. Their commanders made a decision. If they were dying anyway, they'd take as many Marines as possible with them. They planned a massive assault across the entire American perimeter. Radio intercepts confirmed it was coming. The Marines reinforced every sector, but the eastern stretch remained vulnerable. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes walked that line repeatedly. The jungle was too thick. Visibility maybe 30 yards. If the Japanese hit with 200 or 300 men, it would be hand-to-hand combat in the dark against a banzai charge. Hayes asked Division for reinforcements. None available. More machine guns? Back-ordered. Flamethrowers? Both broken. He put his best squad leaders there and told them to hold for 20 minutes until reinforcements arrived. Nobody thought they'd last 10. Behind this line, Tommy was dealing with his oil problem. He dug a pit, poured in the rancid oil, added gasoline. But they weren't mixing properly. The gasoline floated on top. He remembered his mother washing greasy dishes with soap. Maybe soap would help them mix? He grabbed laundry soap flakes and stirred them in. The mixture thickened into a gel. When he dropped a match in, it didn't flash. It produced thick, rolling flames that clung to everything. A burning drop splashed onto his boot. He tried to kick dirt on it. The gel stuck to his boot and kept burning. Water didn't put it out either. Tommy buried the pit and tried to pretend nothing happened. 40 minutes later, his conscience got the better of him. He told Mess Sergeant Crawford. Crawford examined the gel. He was a Guadalcanal veteran. This looked different than anything he'd seen. He brought Lieutenant Colonel Hayes. Hayes looked at the pit, looked at Tommy and asked, "How much can you make before nightfall?" Tommy did quick math. "Maybe 100 gallons if I had help?" Hayes turned to Crawford. "Get him every bit of rancid oil and gasoline we can spare. Get him containers. The Japanese are coming tonight, and we're going to be ready." For 6 hours, Tommy and 10 Marines turned the field kitchen into a munitions factory. They gathered every container available. Beer bottles, ration cans, medicine bottles, fuel containers. They collected oil from everywhere. Rancid cooking oil, used motor oil, hydraulic fluid from damaged aircraft. Tommy supervised carefully, terrified of blowing everyone up. 3 parts oil to 1 part gasoline. Add soap flakes gradually while stirring. The ratio was critical. By sunset, 96 containers, about 110 gallons total. Hayes inspected the work. He picked up a bottle, held it to the fading light. If we light these and throw them, they stick and keep burning? Yes, sir. 30 to 40 seconds minimum. Water won't put it out? No, sir. Hayes set the bottle down carefully. What you've made here is a war crime under the Geneva Convention. Incendiary weapons against personnel. Tommy went pale. Hayes continued. But we're not signatories to that protocol. The Japanese haven't signed it. And I have 400 Marines about to face a banzai charge with insufficient firepower. He looked at Tommy directly. We're positioning these along the eastern sector. If the Japanese attack in overwhelming force, we'll use them. Afterward, this never appears in any report. You never speak of it. As far as anyone knows, we used standard incendiary grenades. Understood? Yes, sir. They spent 2 hours distributing containers to the eastern sector. Sergeant Martinez, commanding a machine gun position, held up a beer bottle of dark gel. You want me to throw Molotov cocktails? These aren't regular Molotov cocktails, Tommy said. The mixture sticks. When it hits someone, it stays on them and keeps burning. Martinez made a face. That's horrible. Yes, Sergeant. But effective? I think so. By 2,100 hours, everything was positioned. Every fighting position got at least 4 containers. The Marines waited. As midnight approached, the jungle got unnaturally quiet. Insects stopped. Birds went silent. Every combat veteran recognized that silence. Something big was moving through the jungle. At 0047 hours, trip flares started popping along the eastern sector. In the harsh light, Marines saw movement. Hundreds of figures moving toward American lines. The Japanese were coming. At 0052 hours, a whistle blew. The jungle erupted with screaming. 200 men charging across open ground, bayonets fixed, screaming their battle cry. Marines opened fire. Marines, guns, rifles. Japanese soldiers fell, but more kept coming. The front ranks took casualties. The ranks behind jumped over bodies, not slowing. This was a real banzai charge. A wall of screaming men who decided they were already dead. Sergeant Martinez watched them come. 100 yards, 75, 50. His gun was overheating. Japanese soldiers dropping, but not fast enough. They hit the wire obstacles. Some tangled, some jumped over, some started cutting through. Martinez grabbed one of Tommy's bottles, lit the rag with his Zippo, stood up and threw it as hard as he could. The bottle hit the ground among soldiers cutting wire. Glass shattered. Burning gel splashed across 6 men. The gel stuck to uniforms, skin, equipment. It burned white-hot in the darkness. The men screamed. They tried to brush it off. That spread it to their hands. They rolled on the ground. That spread it further. The burning gel kept burning. 30 seconds. 40. A full minute. The Marines realized they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But the Japanese kept coming. Martinez picked up a second bottle. For 8 minutes, Marines threw 96 containers into the Japanese assault. It was medieval. Brutal. Effective. Each wave broke against the wall of fire that clung and burned and wouldn't extinguish. The first wave got within 40 yards before machine gun fire and incendiary bottles stopped them. Not all died from bullets. Those hit with burning gel died slowly, screaming. The second wave hesitated at the wire. That hesitation was fatal. Marines picked them off. More bottles sailed through air. More fire. More screaming. The third wave never reached the wire. Japanese commanders watching from the jungle saw their attack catastrophically failing. They'd expected casualties. They'd been willing to accept 50% losses. But not this. Whatever weapon the Americans used was breaking morale. Men who'd charge machine guns without hesitation refused to advance through that burning hell. At 0109 hours, the attack faltered. At 0112 hours, it broke completely. Surviving Japanese retreated into the jungle, leaving dead and dying behind. Marines held fire as the last figures disappeared. Then silence. Exhausted silence. Corporal Reeves picked up the field telephone. "Command, enemy assault repulsed. We're still in position." Hayes's voice. "Casualties?" "None, sir. Minor wounds, nothing serious. The incendiary devices worked as designed." Long pause. "Confirmed? No casualties?" "Confirmed, sir." Hayes said something that might have been a prayer or a curse. "Hold position." Reinforcements arrived to find Marines standing in positions, covered in dirt, staring at ground where 100 Japanese soldiers lay dead or dying, some still burning. The lieutenant leading reinforcements looked at the scene. "What the hell happened here?" Martinez, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "We held the line." "With what?" "Incendiary grenades. Standard issue." It was the story they'd all tell. Nobody mentioned the cook. Nobody mentioned rancid oil or soap flakes. 200 yards back, Tommy sat outside the field kitchen, listening to shooting stop. He hadn't slept. When Crawford found him an hour later, Tommy was still sitting there. Crawford sat beside him. "It worked." "How many?" "Japanese? Over 100 dead. Maybe 50 wounded that escaped." "I meant us. 3 wounded, none serious, 0 dead." Tommy put his head in his hands. "You saved a lot of lives tonight, kid." "I killed a lot of people tonight." "You killed people trying to kill us. That's different." "Is it?" Crawford was quiet. "Yeah, it is." As sun rose, burial details moved through the battlefield. Japanese dead were buried in a mass grave. Chaplains said prayers over them. Hayes filed his after-action report, omitting any mention of improvised incendiary devices. But he also wrote a separate classified memo to Division Intelligence, describing the mixture, components, ratios, and effectiveness. He recommended it be studied for possible future use. That memo worked up the chain of command over following weeks. It reached a chemical weapons research team at Dugway Proving Ground in Utah. They read it with great interest, because they'd been working on almost exactly the same thing. In spring 1942, 2 years before Tommy mixed soap into cooking oil, Harvard scientists received an unusual assignment: create a weapon that sticks to buildings and burns them down. Lead scientist Louis Pfizer experimented with petroleum products and thickening agents. By early 1943, his team developed a mixture of gasoline and aluminum salts of naphthenic and palmitic acids. They called it napalm. It was remarkably similar to what Tommy would create on Bougainville. Same basic concept: thickened petroleum that stuck and burned intensely. The difference: Pfizer's team arrived at the formula through systematic research. Chen arrived at it trying to dispose of rancid oil. When Hayes's memo reached Pfizer's team, they recognized what they were looking at. Field confirmation their laboratory work translated to combat effectiveness. In June 1944, first purpose-built napalm weapons entered service. M69 incendiary cluster bombs dropped across the Pacific. Later, napalm in flamethrowers. Then bombs on cities. Then artillery shells. By war's end, napalm had killed an estimated 500,000 people, mostly Japanese civilians in firebombing raids. In Korea, napalm dropped on Chinese forces. In Vietnam, it became one of the war's most controversial weapons. Images of Vietnamese civilians burned by napalm became symbols of brutality. In 1980, UN Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons restricted incendiary weapons against civilians. But napalm, in various forms, continued worldwide military use. All traced back, in part, to a 19-year-old cook trying to get rid of bad oil. Tommy never knew this. 3 weeks after the battle, he received transfer orders. The commander thought it best if Chen wasn't around when investigators came asking questions. Chen was reassigned to ammunition supply. No more cooking. He spent the war loading trucks and counting inventory in rear areas. After the war, he returned to San Francisco, used the GI Bill for City College, got a degree in accounting, married Grace, a childhood friend, had 3 kids, worked as an accountant for a shipping company for 38 years. He never told anyone what he'd done. Not his wife, not his children, not his friends. In 1989, a historian researching Bougainville contacted him. The historian found Hayes's classified memo mentioning improvised incendiary devices prepared by enlisted kitchen personnel. The historian asked if Chen would talk about it. Chen, 74 years old, said no. The historian asked why. "Because I'm not proud of what I did. I killed people in a way no one should die. That it saved American lives doesn't make it less horrible. That it was an accident doesn't absolve me." He paused. "You know what I think about? How easy it was. 3 ingredients. Basic chemistry any high school student could understand. And it created something that burned people alive. That's what scares me most. Not that I did it, but that it was so easy." The historian asked one more question. "Knowing how napalm would be used, would you still do it?" Long silence. "I don't know. I saved 400 Marines that night. But the weapon I accidentally created killed hundreds of thousands. How do you weigh that? How do you calculate the moral mathematics?" I was 19, trying to dispose of rancid oil. I had no idea what I was creating. Another pause. "But ignorance isn't innocence, is it? The weapon worked. People died. That's the truth." Tommy Chen died in 1997 at 72. His San Francisco Chronicle obituary mentioned his Marine service, accounting career, 3 children, 7 grandchildren. It didn't mention Bougainville. It didn't mention February 3, 1944. It didn't mention napalm. At his funeral, a fellow Marine from the 3rd Division spoke. "Tommy never talked about the war. But those of us there that night knew what he did. He saved our lives. Whatever that weapon became, none of that was his fault." Another veteran disagreed. "No, Tommy would have hated us saying it wasn't his fault. He believed in taking responsibility, even for accidents, even for unintended consequences. That's who he was." Both men were right. Tommy's accidental creation saved hundreds of American lives immediately. It contributed to developing a weapon that killed hundreds of thousands in decades following. These facts exist simultaneously. They don't cancel out. History is full of inventions created for one purpose, used for another. Technologies that seemed like good ideas revealing darker implications later. Dynamite invented for mining became weapons. Airplanes invented for flight became bombers. The internet invented to share information. We're still figuring out how that can go wrong. Tommy didn't invent napalm. Harvard scientists did. But Chen proved accidentally that the concept worked in combat. That proof accelerated the weapon's development and deployment. Was he responsible for what came after? That's a question every generation answers for itself about the technologies it creates. Sometimes the most dangerous inventions start with good intentions. Sometimes they start with no intentions at all. Just a 19-year-old solving an immediate problem with materials at hand. And sometimes the solution works too well. If you found this thought-provoking, there are other stories wrestling with similar moral complexities. Like the colorblind 16-year-old who saved 300 lives by seeing through camouflage, but only after lying his way into combat. Or the 20-year-old who simplified torpedo targeting to save submariners, but made it easier to sink ships full of civilians. War forces impossible choices. Sometimes heroes are the ones who carry those choices for life. Hit subscribe for more stories that don't have easy answers. Thanks for watching. And remember, not all innovation is progress. Sometimes we invent something that works too well.